Hello, welcome to History 102, Lecture 4, American Foreign Policy, 1870 to 1914. In your OpenStax textbook, this should be Chapter 44. If you're using the ushistory.org notes, it would be Chapter 22. Historically, generally, American foreign policy, one of the most common words used is isolationism. America separated from the world geopolitically and diplomatically. There are time periods where that's not as true as others, and then some historians debate if really America's ever been an isolationist country. Maybe isolationist towards certain things, but definitely willing to participate and intervene or interfere, depending on how you interpret it, in world events. In the late 19th century, we see the U.S. governments, the U.S. administrations in the late 19th century being more interested in global politics, from Cuba to the Philippines, from China to Venezuela, and it's a difference between pre-Civil War diplomacy, where you don't see a lot of interest in American administrations to interact with the world diplomatically or otherwise. There's several explanations or justifications for why why U.S. governments during this era went abroad and set up colonies, looked for natural resources, and extended American military power. The number one reason that given, not necessarily in order of importance, but number one, dollars. The U.S. economy traded with the world a lot more in 1900 they did in the Civil War era. As the United States becomes a manufacturing and industrial giant and player on the world stage, it's natural for the government to take a more interest in what's going on in the world. As you can see, on the slide, total national exports go from 392 million to 1.4 billion. Okay, you're trading a lot more with the world, and so now there's a natural progression to, more money's involved. I am more interested in what's going on with the world, and as you can see, world trade quadrupled between 1860 and 1900. Second, defense. In the late 19th, early 20th century, the United States sought to have a two-ocean navy. A navy not just for the Atlantic, which is historically what it focused on, but as the United States became increasingly interested in the Pacific and China and trading with China, also noticing the rise of Japan as an industrial and military power in the Pacific, American administrations became a lot more interested in the military aspects of the Pacific. Coaling stations, trading posts, U.S. territories to, house military defense, or, the Navy, naval yards across the Pacific. Democracy. Going back to, if you've had History 101, you talked about Manifest Destiny being a popular reason to go west, right? When you went west with Manifest Destiny, when you went west to bring American civilization, American democracy, and American-style Protestantism to the uncivilized and savage West. And so you take that Manifest Destiny idea and just extend it. Just move the frontier. Instead of the frontier being the American West, the frontier is Cuba, Hawaii, Central America, the Philippines. And so you argue that you're spreading democracy. Okay? You're spreading American civilization. You're spreading American democracy. And then the last one on the list, deity, you're spreading American Protestantism abroad. And so, for example, there's an interesting kind of a funny quote of a writer of a writer in the early 20th century, talking about Christianizing. Why are we in the Philippines? Well, we got to Christianize them. Well, what's funny is the Philippines was Spanish for several hundred years. There's a lot of Catholics. They're Christian. But you see, the manifest destiny idea is that, you're the civilized, right? And so you gotta go west to the Philippines for democracy, to bring the poor benighted people democracy, American civilization, and then not just American Christianity, because a lot of Filipinos are Christian. They're just Catholic. That's their flavor. Their flavor of Christianity is Catholic. And so, well, no, that's not appropriate. We've got to bring them American Protestantism. And so, deity, right? We've got you're that manifest destiny idea. We got to go west, south, everywhere to spread American values. Darwinism, the social Darwinism, kind of goes back to the theory of evolution. We talked about the social Darwinism and the idea that some races or groups are more evolved or more advanced than others. And Europeans look at themselves and define themselves as civilized. Therefore, anyone that is not us is uncivilized. And so the goal is to go west to civilize these people, the Philippines or Cuba, Central America, whatever. They're not advanced. They don't live the way we do. And so we've got to civilize them. And then destiny kind of goes back to manifest destiny. God has blessed you with a mission. And so you're to go west to, again, help the world. And that's your burden, okay, to go west and help the world not be so uncivilized and so barbarian. Yep. The first example during this era is Hawaii. American planters and missionaries are first interested in Hawaii in the 1820s, called the Sandwich Islands at the time. Hawaii is an excellent place to grow sugar. Hawaii in the early 19th century, not Christian, not a lot of Christians living there. And so it's an example of manifest destiny. These people need civilization. These people need a modern economy, sugar planting, and these people need something even more, Protestant Christianity. And so we have planters establishing trade with Hawaii. Sorry, that should be Hawaii, not China. With Hawaii under King Kamehameha the First. The famous Pearl Harbor opens in 1877 as a trading port. When we skip to the 1890s, we want to talk about Queen Liliuokalani. Queen Liliuokalani's platform was Hawaii for the Hawaiians. So she wanted to kick out non-Hawaiians, and so she sought to. Sugar planters had grown economically strong, politically and economically powerful, and so they get rid of Queen Liliuokalani in a coup, and they replaced her with a provisional government that nearly immediately asks for American military assistance, which is provided. I should have paused on that. Which is provided, and you immediately ask for annexation. And so that's how we get Hawaii. In 1893, the provisional the planters in Hawaii will ask for annexation. It won't be annexed until 1898, though, with President McKinley. Next. The Spanish-American War is generally treated as kind of the poster child of American foreign policy involvement in the late 19th century. So let's talk a little about the Spanish-American War. First, we need to go back and, how did the Spanish get here? Well, from our popular history, we know, Columbus, 1492. What develops over the centuries after Columbus is a Spanish-American empire from California to Tierra del Fuego in Argentina, right? Well, Chile. Chile's on the bottom. Anyways, So you have the Spanish-American Empire. By the early 19th century, the Spanish-American Empire is falling apart, crumbling. Okay, and by the 1830s, there's really only a couple pieces of the Spanish-American Empire left, and one of them is Cuba. So Cuba is like one of the last remaining Spanish colonies in the New World. In the 1870s, native Cubans rebelled, tried to kick out the Spaniards, much like the Americans kicked out the British in 1776, and Mexicans kicked out the Spanish in 1821. You have the Cubans trying to kick out the Spanish in the 1870s. That rebellion fails. It gets crushed. What is the Grant? The Grant administration, Ulysses Grant was president at the time during that rebellion, and the Grant administration refused to participate. It wasn't in our interest, they said, and so we don't participate in that Cuban revolution. In the 1890s, another Cuban revolution starts during the Cleveland administration, and then it goes into the McKinley administration. And this one, though, lasts for a while. It doesn't get crushed so easily. It lasts for quite a while. And so this war in Cuba, just 90 miles away from the U.S., this war gets a lot of American attention in the American press. American popular opinion during the 1890s is that we need to definitely help these poor Cubans. Okay, they're trying to revolt from the Spanish. And so yellow journalism becomes a hot topic or a thing in the late 19th century as New York newspapers and spreads across the country. As New York newspapers attempt to attract readers to their paper, what do people want to hear? They want to hear cool stories. They want to hear sensational stories. And so you see newspapers starting to, creative license, make things up, kind of sensationalize their stories so that, you'll read their paper rather than the other one. One of the famous quotes during this era is a reporter, a New York City reporter for a New York paper, head to Cuba, and he says, I'll do pictures, and then, when do you want your stories? What's the deadline for these stories? And the editor is supposed to have said, you provide the photographs, I'll provide the war. And so that's an example of yellow journalism, this idea that, we're not going to report the facts or what happened. We just need readers, right? We need readers. And so all I need you to do, reporter, is not report. All I need you is to provide the pictures, and I will, I'll provide the war. I'll tell the stories. In February of in February of 1898, the USS Maine, a U.S. warship, is stationed in Havana Harbor to kind of observe what's going on. You're in the middle of a rebellion, only 90 miles away from Florida, and so you have the USS Maine stationed. On the night of February 14th, the Maine explodes, and several hundred lose their lives. A U.S. warship is blown up. Historically, Americans don't like when their things are blown up, and so what's going on? What are we going to do about it? American public opinion wants to go to war. The McKinley administration is a little hesitant to dive in, and so the Cuban rebels blame the Spanish. The Spanish deny it. They're like, why would we blow up an American warship and drag America into a war we don't want them in? Obviously, the Cuban rebels blame the Spanish, so that we'll dive in and help. Interestingly enough, in the initial congressional investigation blamed it on an accident, blamed the explosion on an accident in the coal room, the ammo heating up, like coal room, some of the coals and heat getting into the ammo room, and the ammo room, heating up and blowing up, which, not to spoil the movie, which is actually what happened, but you're not going to go to war on an accident. The second congressional investigation blames the Spanish, and so that's why you have what Theodore Roosevelt called a splendid little war. Okay, you got your war to, free ostensibly to free Cuba from Spanish oppression. And so it's a 4-month war, April to August. There's a Cuban battle. And so you have your splendid little war, as I said. So there's a 4-month war. There's some fighting in Cuba. Interestingly enough, the major battle, the biggest battle, is in the Philippines, half a world away from Cuba, which tells you that some in the U.S. military establishment during the time view this as a great opportunity to, get a trading, like a trading post, a coaling station. You get the Philippines a lot closer to China to trade. You can exert your military and economic power across the Pacific. And so we get the Philippines in this war as well. And we ostensibly free Cuba. Spain surrenders. We ostensibly free Cuba from Spanish domination. We also get the Philippines too. We also get Guam. We also get Puerto Rico. Okay. So all of a sudden you have, as some critics call it, an American empire. You have America across the ocean, right? The Pacific. When the U.S. is going to militarily occupy Cuba for a little bit, at the end of it, you're going to have the Platt Amendment, which gives the U.S. government, military, the right to intervene in Cuban affairs, should they have problems again. And that'll be used a few times for American troops to go to Cuba. A lot of students don't realize this, but we actually occupied Cuba militarily for a few years. And another thing we don't always realize is it actually starts another war. The Filipinos, under a man named Aquino, are actually, when the Spanish-American War breaks out, Native Filipinos are fighting the Spanish. They're having a revolution or a rebellion of their own. When we go in, we're actually helping these, Filipino rebels get rid of the Spanish, but then we stay. Well, guess what happens? Aquino starts fighting American troops. And so it'll be, it's kind of a little known thing. Our population kind of focuses on the Spanish-American War, and then we move on to other things. What kind of gets forgotten is we actually spent 3 more years fighting in the Philippines, but this time not the Spanish, but we end up fighting, the Filipinos, the people we liberate. You end up fighting the people you liberated. Okay. And so it's like, so you have a problem. You have a debate over the Philippines. You have some people supporting annexation. Some people saying we should return the Philippines to Spain. Some people, such as Theodore Roosevelt, suggest that colonies reinvigorate and strengthen nations. They're good for the economy. They're good for the world to civilize it. They're good for the U.S. military to have bases around the world. They're able to dominate Asian trade. Spread Christianity to the world. And so the annexation side is that manifest destiny side where, well, America can do a lot of good, abroad. The kind of anti-imperialist side, or the side we shouldn't have annexed the Philippines, is the idea of imperialism is moral. They're arguing that you shouldn't go abroad. Like sometimes you think you're doing good, you might be doing bad. Your fear of outsourcing jobs to the American nation. Sugar growers feared unwelcome competition. And then, for some anti-imperialists, it goes against American ideals, right? We used to be a colony, and we fought a war to get rid of our colonial overlords, you might say. And so let's not do that, is what some people said. Like I said, the Filipino War, one of the least remembered American wars. Okay, I'm sorry, Aquino, not Aguinaldo. Emilio Aguinaldo. The fighting ended 4 years later. The Philippines is going to be part of the kind of the U.S. territory, U.S. holding until 1946, when they'll be granted independence. We'll be talking about the Progressive Era in Lecture 5, but I'm not going to talk about foreign policy there. I'll just going to talk about it here. Theodore Roosevelt, considered a progressive president. His foreign policy was called big stick diplomacy. He had a famous saying, I walk softly and carry a big stick. And so he argued his diplomacy was, walk softly and carry the big stick, kind of American military power. For example, the Roosevelt Corollary. He came up with the Roosevelt Corollary to the Monroe Doctrine. What's the Monroe Doctrine? Just that idea in the 1820s. Not really well known at the time. It's not really well known until this period. But the Monroe Doctrine being, that Europe should stay out of the Western Hemisphere, not colonize the Western Hemisphere again. And the Roosevelt Corollary to that says that the Western Hemisphere is American, meaning America is the policeman of the New World. And so, the European countries should go to the U.S. if they have a problem with another country. And for your example here would be Venezuela. Venezuela owed a bunch of money to like Germany and England. They defaulted on some loans. The British and German navies came to bomb some Venezuelan ports. And that's an example. Theodore Roosevelt's famous saying was, if Venezuela needs to be spanked, we'll do the spanking. So that's kind of that point of view. You can, in your book, you can read about the Panama Canal. That's another example of this big stick diplomacy. Moving in, kind of demonstrating American military might, and then economic might. As we help Panama become independent, then we lease the land from them and build the Panama Canal. William Howard Taft, the president after Roosevelt, had what's called dollar diplomacy. Historians look at this as kind of a expanding or using American economic power to gain control or to control a region. Your famous example here is Nicaragua. In the late 19th, early 20th century, there was a company called the United Fruit Company. It was a extremely large company, very big, mainly and operated a lot in South America, in Central America, especially Nicaragua. In Nicaragua, the United Fruit Company was so powerful economically, they could affect politics. And so, Nicaragua is an example of whenever the United Fruit Company thought its interests were threatened, they would just call in the American military, and they would go. So Nicaragua, over the late 19th, early 20th centuries, had multiple American military occupations throughout the period. If there was political instability, economic instability, if the wrong guy was in power, and so you exert your economics, right? The United Fruit Company, a wealthy company, is able to use its economic power to get U.S. military support in Nicaragua. Mexico becomes the example of missionary diplomacy under Woodrow Wilson. So Mexico in the late 19th, early 20th century kept having revolutions. Like a government would get elected, there'd be a revolution, he'd get out. Another government would come, they would get involved in a rebellion or a revolution. So Mexico was unstable politically for a while. The U.S. administrations before Wilson, up to Wilson, are concerned with political instability on its southern border. Why can't Mexico be politically stable? For several decades, it's one government after another, comes and goes. Okay. The second issue is Mexico appears so lawless, so unable, so unstable, they can't control people outlaws, or they can't control people that come into the United States and shoot people up. And that would be the famous Pancho Villa story. Pancho Villa mainly operated in Mexico as part of these various Mexican rebellions. He also enters the U.S. at one point with his men and does kill several people in a New Mexican town in New Mexico. And so this is going to, of course, upset the U.S. government. Troops are going to be sent in. One example, a couple thousand troops are sent in to hunt down Mexico to hunt down Pancho Villa for a couple of years. And so Pancho Villa evading capture, he kind of becomes a folk hero in Mexico because of his ability to circumvent, get around, or stay away from the Yankees to the north. Woodrow Wilson's famous saying about Mexico during this time period was, "We will teach them to elect good men." Okay, so you see that's the point. Is we're spreading democracy. You're gonna learn how to elect good men. You're gonna learn how to elect a government and stay in power. It's not gonna fall apart through a revolution. If it changes government, it'll be through an election. And lastly, I wanted to show you this map. Again, a lot of people go, well, America's an isolationist country. We don't like getting involved in the world. Well, look at this map. Not all of them. It's a bunch of most of them. It's a lot of the military interventions, financially and militarily, in the late 19th and early 20th century. We might have been, neutral or isolationist towards Europe, but very willing to get involved in Central and South America. So you can look up this. You can look at this map here and kind of see. There are some countries that the U.S. Congress ran their finances. So some countries were under financial supervision. That's dollar diplomacy, right? Where the U.S. Congress not only was working on the U.S. budget, they're working on the budgets of several other Latin American countries. We're telling you how to spend your money. And then again, multiple military involvements whenever, if there's some political instability, the United Fruit Company just call up to the military, "Can I have some troops, please?" "Yes, you may." "When do you want them?" "Tonight." "I'll see you tonight." And so, where you're gonna get U.S. military down there, okay? And so that is American foreign policy in the late 19th and early 20th century. Thank you for watching. Have a good day.